In the intestinal tract, you have all these bacteria cultures that then convert the food into building blocks or energy units or toxins. So you have, I always say, 10% good bacteria, 10% bad, and 80% opportunists, depending on what you're eating, where you're eating, and what's your state of eating. And then finally, through all this is moved through peristaltic contraction, and you eliminate whatever's not being utilized.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Leigh Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. Welcome to this week's edition of the Radical Health Rebel podcast, episode 55, entitled Overcoming Gas, Bloating and Acid Reflux with Wade Lightheart. So some of you may know Wade as the co-owner of BiOptimizers, the nutritional supplement company. But Wade has a really rich and interesting story going back to the age of 15 years old, when he knew exactly what he was going to be doing for the rest of his life. Now, whilst I wanted to interview Wade to really get to the bottom of what causes things like gas, bloating, acid reflux, yes, we covered that subject, but we also managed to cover a lot of subjects in detail as well. You know, we spoke about digestive enzymes, we spoke about hydrochloric acid, we spoke about the gut microbiome and probiotics, we spoke about detoxification, we spoke about the efficiency of digestion and its effects on muscle growth and metabolism. We discussed why it's important that people do need to take dietary supplements for health. And we also discussed the gut-brain connection. If you're someone that likes to really nerd out on the detailed information, but also get bite-sized chunks that are usable, this is a really great episode for you. Hope you enjoy it. Wade Lightheart, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, sir. Great to be here.
It's great to have you on. It's a real honor to have you on the show. So Wade, to kick things off, could you share with the audience an overview of your, entire health journey? I know it's been quite a journey for you to where you are now, running your supplement company, Biooptimizers, for the last, 19 years.
Sure. So one of the things that we established is, I think, a journey encompasses a variety of themes, I think, as you go through the course of your career. We've divided those up at Biooptimizers into three categories: health, performance, and aesthetics. And I'm going to get into this in just a second. So when I was, I got started in, I played sports, grew up in Canada in the rural area, hockey, all that sort of stuff. And then when I was 15, my life changed, where my sister was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, which is cancer of the lymph nodes. And then we moved to a very rural setting. It was 5 miles to my nearest neighbor on a mountain on the dirt road, where my parents were caretakers for a private resort. So, and then during the course of the next 4 years, as my sister's health waned until she died at the age of 22, she was 4 years my senior, it had a big impact on me that, wait a second, your health isn't a guarantee and your life is not a guarantee at a very formative age. So that obviously had some effects. The other thing is I can remember when we were going home from her chemotherapy treatments, it was about a 55-mile drive, and we'd have to stop maybe half a dozen times where she would get out and vomit from the treatment. And I remember in my naive kind of 15-year-old self thinking, why is the treatment they're providing for her making her more sick? Like, if you want to be healthy, don't you do things to make you healthy, not make things to sick? So the treatment seemed worse than the disease. And so she gave me around that time, she gave me a picture of Muscle and Fitness book that had Troy Ciclotto on the cover, and pretty girls, And I saw these muscles, and he had blonde hair, and he was in California, living in the sun. I was like, wow, that looks like a great place considered where I am now. It's cold, it's dark, there's nobody around, there's no girls around, and stuff. And maybe if I get these muscles, I'll maybe I can have that too. And, I opened it up and discovered Arnold Schwarzenegger and his principles, and he got his book, Education of a Bodybuilder, and was really thought of, if you built these muscles and these outside things, that would be health and vitality. So I was attracted to the aesthetics part of the equation. I built a gym in my barn and started training like Rocky style. I would go out there and freeze my hands to the bar and wear a snowsuit in the winter, and people thought I was crazy. But I built up this dream that I was going to compete at the Mr. Universe. I was going to live in California and train at Gold's Gym, California. I was going to write books and have a nutritional supplement company that sold products all over the world. That was my 15-year-old dream. Yeah. And I went to, after my first year of university, my sister died in my first term. I switched from computer science to exercise physiology. And after about a week of, computer science, I realized I was more cut out for my passion, which was fitness and exercise and stuff, and thought I would be into sports medicine or something like that. But anyways, went down the road, got out of school 4 years later, realized it was a conglomerate of information, but there was no system to it. So, you learn physiology here and biology here and chemistry here, but nobody knew how to put all these things together into something that was applicable. It was just all compartmentalized gobbledygook, essentially. I mean, it gave you a background, but today and the internet, you could learn all that in maybe 6 months. You could probably learn a whole degree's worth, and much more streamlined with what's available today from probably better instructors. So that was pre-internet and all that sort of stuff. So things have changed a lot since then. So I took it upon myself to find mentors who were producing the results that I wanted. I started like, okay, well, who's doing what I wanted, and how would I do that? And I can remember reading Arnold's book, and he said something that stuck with me my whole life. He said, an education of a bodybuilder, he says, if you want to be successful, you have to have a positive attitude. You needed to work hard. Right. And I was like, positive attitude, what's that? Nobody had a positive attitude. And I was like, everybody worked hard. Right. And I was like, okay, so this is kind of like the foundational aspect of being able to overcome obstacles, I think, and to work hard. And then the final piece was self-discipline. And I was like, what's that? No one talked about self-discipline. And that was deciding what you want, deciding to, learn a program that you can apply to get to where you want, and stay disciplined in the application of those principles. And hopefully you pick the right mentors. And I just used that throughout my entire life. And so, long story short, I got into bodybuilding. I did more bodybuilding, did a bunch of competitions. I had terrible genetics for it. I had, I lost for 10 years. I worked in every single aspect of the nutritional industry. After 10 years of training, I won my first show, which was the overall men's in New Brunswick. The next year, I went to the national championships in '98 under the tutelage of Scott Abel, one of the best bodybuilding coaches in the world, and recognized that was a time when Dorian Yates was flipping to Ronnie Coleman at that time. And upon assessing the situation, I was like, well, really doesn't matter whatever I do. There's no way in hell I'll ever beat Ronnie Coleman. That's not going to happen. I just was not born with those genetics. And the bodybuilding at that time had become essentially a drug cult. And in order to sustain the level of competition at that level, you would have to take prodigious amounts of steroids, growth hormone, insulin, beta blockers, and beta androgens, like all this laundry list of chemicals, and you would compromise your health in order to do that. And I think all high performance sports compromise your health to a certain extent. It's a performance based model. So I got clear about the difference between just looking good versus a performance model.
Yeah.
Now, most people don't think bodybuilders are that aesthetic, but there's an aesthetics built into bodybuilding that is recognized in that culture of like how to put your body together that looks a certain way and has all the proportions, etc. And I was always fascinated. To me, it seemed like art. So I stopped all that, started my own nutrition company out on the West Coast, opened up a personal training component. And because I looked the part and I knew something about training and nutrition, I had next thing you know, I had a laundry list of clients and I had a little juice bar where I met everybody and I was making protein shakes and stuff. And then I had my first taste of success, which I crashed and burned shortly after that by, discovering the underground party scene and getting into all that sort of stuff. It was kind of, I think, a way of processing out my disappointment of not going to be a professional bodybuilder. And eventually, when that came to an end, my party lifestyle, I had a kind of a mystical experience with a spiritual teacher that showed up in my life, and I began meditating. Shortly afterwards, about 6 months later, I switched to a plant-based diet, and they started to have drug-tested competitions, and I thought, hey, this would be cool. My spiritual teacher said that if you tried something and it doesn't exist, if it's right for you, but it doesn't exist, the divine, the universe, great spirit, whatever you want to call it, would create it for you. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to put that to the test. I'm going to be a drug-free vegetarian bodybuilder, and I'm going to compete at the Mr. Universe because that was my dream before. I couldn't do it on this way. So if this guy's right and I apply myself diligently, I'm going to put this to the test. Long story short, 2 years later, I was standing on stage at the Mr. Universe contest in Mumbai, India, representing my country, Canada. And after the contest, I met some boys that couldn't get to the show because they couldn't afford tickets. I did a seminar for them and realized it wasn't about competing in Mr. Universes. It was actually about advocating health. And I was answering questions of those kids that I had when I was 15, when I was their age. And that whole thing came full circle. After that, I got back. My business partner, Matt Gallant, who was an online marketer, we were friends and personal trainers, kind of training the who's who in Vancouver. He said, hey, look, this is a great story. You won a national championship. You're competing at the Mr. Universe. You're doing it without drugs. You're doing it on a plant-based diet. We could market this online. I'm like, what are you talking about? Nobody's making money online. I don't even own a computer. And he's like, he didn't believe I didn't own a computer. I didn't believe that he was making money online. So we decided, hey, let's start a business. And I wrote a book with him, and we did some audios. It was called Freaky Big Naturally. And I'm literally probably the only person in the world that had a successful online business and didn't own a computer. In fact, our first payment that we paid ourselves a few months after we started, 2 or 3 months after, I actually bought a computer because I didn't own one. I was using those internet cafes at the time and stuff to write the stuff on. So it was kind of fascinating. And then a few years later, we moved to Panama together, lived down there for a while. He stayed and married a lady down there. The culture didn't suit me that well. I moved back and began this laptop lifestyle, lived all over the world, did some direct sales stuff as well. That worked out really well for me. And then about 10 years ago, we rebranded the company under the name of BiOptimizers. We kind of moved out of the bodybuilding world and we're more into general health practitioners because what I forgot to mention in 2003, after the Mr. Universe contest, I gained 42 pounds of fat and water in 11 weeks. I had tried to apply a meat-eating mentality to a vegetarian, a vegetarian diet, and it destroyed my digestive health. I met a doctor, that Dr. O'Brien. He had helped Bernard Jensen recover from prostate cancer that was metastasized to his bone. He had overcome cirrhosis of the liver. He'd overcome colon cancer. And he was talking all about the gut and digestive enzymes and probiotics and these things. Nobody was talking about this in 2003. Maybe Paul was. But, I engaged in this program, got my health back in 6 months. And that's where we really started to advocate that. And then, of course, that eventually led to BiOptimizers. We focused on digestive health first. And then we went into the nervous system, sleep, brain, cognitive enhancement, and started offering that. And it's been a rocket ride ever since. And then eventually, about 4 years ago, I moved to California. So when I lost my health, so I got into aesthetics, that went to performance. And then I realized, oh, you can lose your health. And that's the most important piece. So anyways, 4 years ago, I moved down here in Venice Beach, California, kind of realize my dream. So I got to go to the Mr. Universe a couple times. In 2007, I made a comeback, won a couple more national titles, went as a junior masters and went to the Mr. Olympia, natural Mr. Olympia again. And that was a lot of fun, and then retired again until 4 years ago. And then he came back. And then last year, as a 50-year-old, I came back and said, okay, won the Ironman International. Old guys and the overall men's, which was shocking, and went to the Olympia again, which was fun, the natural Olympia. Now I can get to the Olympia. I have enough knowledge and information that I can get into condition and have enough aesthetics to get there. It's another level of genetics to win, and that's fine. I got to show up, and then 6 months later, I said, well, let's apply this to running, and I ran my first marathon in 4 hours. 6 months later. So I'm one of the few bodybuilders that's competed at the Natural Olympia and then run a marathon, certainly within 6 months. So all that to say is there's a lot of things inside of that journey, but what I'm most proud of is the hundreds of thousands of people that we've served and helped them improve their health, their vitality, their functional side. And the things that I do are merely a point of interest and a footnote to say there's more ways to skin the cat than might be out there. Yeah. And it's also if I'm going to advocate something, I better have done it. I'm not talking about the realms of opinions and theories. I'm sharing real world experience that I have, and then we'll try and unpack the reasons why that happened or why it didn't work as well or how we might optimize it.
That's amazing. I can't get away from the fact that at 15-year-old, as a 15-year-old, you had a dream, and that was, you wanted to achieve three things, and you achieved all those three things. That's pretty unique for someone 15 years old to have that kind of level of vision. I always I laugh about that because I find that it's a blessing and a curse. For whatever reason, I've always been able to see into the future. I don't know why. Maybe because when I was at that early age, it was a very rural setting in the development of my brain. So I had to kind of maybe access universal consciousness or something like that. I don't know. But in that process where I spent so much time alone and cultivated an inner awareness, and then as you start to cultivate an inner awareness, you start to realize, well, what's being aware? I'm not really my body. I'm observing my body. I'm feeling my body, but that means I must not be my body. And then eventually, as my spirituality started to unfold and my meditative practices, I started to realize, well, I'm not my thoughts either. And then as I got further in my emotional, psychological developments, I was like, well, I'm not really my feelings either. So if I'm not my body and I'm not my mind and I'm not my feelings, what am I? And then, I've been blessed with a lot of great teachers and have provided me access to maybe the future. The downside of it is I'm not very good with timelines. I figured I would have done all that stuff in my mid-20s or 30s. It took me like 35 years for all that stuff to happen. So, you could tap into the universal spirit maybe, but that doesn't mean necessarily like in infinity, a decade or 20 years or 100 years is not a lot of time. So you better enjoy your journey along the way. And I certainly have. And I think that's the one thing I would encourage anybody. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I wanted to win the Olympia. I wanted to win the Mr. Universe. But in the pursuit of that, I got enriched in so many other ways that far exceed a trophy, a title, or anything like that. So I do believe aim as high as you can. And there's an internal pull to it. So that is your soul's destiny. And
what you can't see will be revealed once you go over the next mountain and the next mountain and the next mountain. And I was really odd and lucky.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about timelines. I mean, I feel that certainly the older I get, the more I kind of understand timelines, in that I think everything does happen at the right time.
Yes, it does.
So whereas, as you were alluding to, you probably could have achieved it in 10 or 15 years, but actually the way that it turned out was actually the best way, rather than it happening quicker. Because you learned a lot along the way.
100%. And, I think looking back now, I think one of the greatest things that happened to me was the lack of success early in my life. And people go, why is that? Well, and you see this kind of like with success that hits young actors or young famous people or young athletes, money, fame. These are very powerful influencers that can amplify aspects of your psychology that you're really not capable of managing until you mature a little bit more. And it's hard enough as you mature, but I think that for so many of those people, it's so easy to criticize the rich or the powerful or the elite, but you start to realize, well, how would I do if I was subjected to, the fame of, these people at any given time, let alone when you're still forming your forebrain in your it's a recipe for disaster. It's very difficult to manage. And most people struggle with that. And so having to struggle through all those things, and I didn't get it all right. I screwed up a lot. I ended up, hospitalized from a drug usage. Did some plant medicine to recover from that. I've died a couple of times and came back from that. It's not like it was all roses for me either. So I'm not here to advocate that I figured it all out and I'm some wonderful being that just kind of tiptoed through the tulips on my way. I made all the mistakes, and it was grace that's allowed me to be here. And so I think that's where cultivating a spiritual understanding of the world becomes extremely valuable to help you overcome the egoic tendencies that we all have.
Yeah. Awesome. So one thing I want to get into, so I work a lot with people with gastrointestinal issues. So, the common ones, gas or wind, bloating, heartburn, etc. What, in your view, are the causes? And possibly more importantly, what would you suggest are the solutions to overcoming such problems?
Sure. Well, number one, I think if you go to all the nutrition books out there that's out in the world and courses and everything, you'll see these massive volumes and textbooks of everything about protein and fats and carbohydrates and et cetera, and all this sort of minerals and all the roles and functions of all this stuff. And there'll be a couple lines on the role of enzymes and probiotics. So the fundamental aspect that almost everyone in the nutrition industry makes a flawed assumption is that if I put food in my mouth, it's automatically converted into energy or building blocks. And we have a digestive system, and I've broken it down into 5 stages of how digestion works. And, the sensory experience at first, taste, touch, smell, preparation of the food, the aroma, all that sort of stuff, which you'll start to salivate, produce, enzymes, and you eat the food, you masticate the food. It goes down the esophagus and into the upper cardiac portion of the stomach. You got 30 to 60 minutes where the enzymes present are supposed to break that food down. Then hydrochloric acid comes in. That does 2 things. It disinfects the food from parasites, bacteria, viruses, bugs, whatever you might have consumed with it. And then your body, and it also changes the pH, which activates some enzymes and deactivates others. And then your body uses bicarbonate buffers, which is a fancy name for minerals, to neutralize the acid in the stomach before it goes into the intestinal tract. In the intestinal tract, you have all these bacteria cultures that then convert the food into building blocks or energy units or toxins. So you have, I always say 10% good, bacteria, 10% bad, and 80% opportunists, depending on what you're eating, where you're eating, and what's your state of eating. And then finally, through all this is moved through peristaltic contraction, and you eliminate whatever's not being utilized. So the problems that people encounter in digestion are, one, they're selecting the wrong food based on their sensory inputs that are incorrect. Number two, they are not masticating their food sufficiently enough so that they can get it into the body in a state that can be easily broken down. Number three, they're not producing enough hydrochloric acid. Very common. And they treat that with antacid pills, which is kind of fascinating. That's because if you don't have enough acid, you start to ferment the food. It creates gas. That opens the esophageal sphincter. Some of that acid will splash up and cause acid reflux and heartburn. Okay. Also, we eat our food mostly in a cooked state. So we have no enzymes present in the food that forces our body to manufacture enzymes. And we can manufacture enzymes, but there's a metabolic cost to that process by manufacturing enzymes. And so people haven't recognized the full expense of that over the long term of health. And it may not digest your food properly. And then the next piece, or the fourth piece, is insufficient amount of good bacteria or an excess of bad bacteria in your body that causes imbalance in the digestive stress, and that leads to leaky gut or the production of toxins or the impairment of immune function. And then, the final piece is, spinal misalignments that are putting undue pressure on the nervous system function, which is preventing the organs to operate fully, or for peristaltic contractions to move the food through the body. And you can also add hydration onto that, because I think a lot of people are chronically dehydrated and they just built up, cement-like mucoid plaque through their whole system. They can't actually absorb and utilize the food that they're eating. So those are the areas where people run into problems. And so as a company, we started to digest over the thousands and thousands and thousands of people, we are figuring out, really effective ways to optimize that digestive process, regardless of the dietary selection that you have. Like Matt, my business partner, is a ketogenic guy. I'm a plant-based guy, and we run a company together where we don't hold these, ideological narrow bands of, dietary zealotry.
So for people that have those kind of issues, what would you suggest are solutions?
Yeah. So there's a couple of really cool tests you can do. Simple tests at home. First off, if you find that you're feeling bloated or you're not digesting your food well, or you have excessive gas. So one thing, you can take a little bit of lemon juice, maybe a couple tablespoons after fresh lemon juice when you eat. If you feel better on that, probably you're deficient in enzymes. If you're low in hydrochloric acid, you can just take a quarter teaspoon of baking soda and 4 ounces of water, drink it on an empty stomach. If you burp within 5 minutes, you've got enough hydrochloric acid. If you don't, you're not producing enough. And then 3, you can look at a stool sample test with a naturopathic doctor and see if you have the right amount of bacteria cultures, or if you are prone to leaky gut. Harvard just released a study that virtually everybody they studied has some level of leaky gut, that is undigested proteins leaking into the bloodstream, causing an inflammatory response as your autoimmune system thinks that you have invaders. Largely in part, that's from a highly chemicalized diet, particularly things like glyphosate and things like that, which are perforating the digestive health, or a lot of processed food. So most people, I would say, run those 3 tests, go through an elimination diet to begin with, hydrate properly, and then start introducing natural whole foods with the correct amount of movement. A lot of people are sitting all the time, which impairs their digestive system. So you got to move a lot. You got to breathe well, learn diaphragmatic breathing so that you're actually pumping the lymph out through your system. All the things that, Paul Chek teaches in his 4D program, I think, are there. And then And then using the particular supplements that will help support the holes in your diet. So whether that's enzymes, hydrochloric acid, or probiotics, most people as they get older often are more and more deficient in those key elements. And then you can go another level on the genetic side and recognize that you have enzymatic predispositions or pathways that can be addressed. So for example, I have suboptimal digestive detoxification pathways, and I have my satiety response is more delayed than ordinary people. So I have to be conscious of overeating, right? And I have to make sure that I'm using detoxification technology on a regular basis to make sure that I'm clearing toxins out of my system. If I do that, everything works great. If I don't do that, I start to, I'll start to feel the lack of performance. And I don't do as well metabolizing fats. That's another piece. So, I do very well on carbohydrates and plant fibers. So, and that's not intuitive. You think I'm from Northern Europe, I should be, pounding meat and living like a more paleo or carnivore type diet, but I do very well on a plant-based diet, but I address those suboptimal aspects of a plant-based diet with my dietary regimen. So you can do anything you want once you know your genetics, your lifestyle, your goals and outcomes, and then you put it through your hierarchy of values so that you are, in alignment with your inner self. And I think that's a big factor in health.
Definitely. So you've mentioned digestive enzymes, you've mentioned hydrochloric acid. I think you mentioned probiotics, I think.
I did, yep.
If someone's obviously listening to this, what would your advice be in terms of choosing a high quality product in each of those?
Yeah, great question. So when it comes to the category of, let's say, enzymes, they're classified into a number of different areas. Enzymes are classified as plant-based enzymes, animal-based enzymes, systemic enzymes, and cultured enzymes. So animal-based enzymes have the least amount of effectiveness and variability because they only work within a narrow pH range. Plant-based enzymes are oftentimes, they have a bigger range, but they may not be as potent as some animal-based enzymes, depending on the type of enzymes that are present. So, if you were to compare, say, Wob enzyme versus, bromelain and papain that you'd find in a low-grade enzyme, okay? So Wob enzyme might be very good for certain things, and the plant-based might be good for, fruit and things like that. All right. What's a systemic enzyme? A systemic enzyme is an enzyme that you would take not with food. So a great example would be nattokinase. A lot of people are using that to deal with cardiovascular conditions or buildup of plaque inside the blood. I think it's a great product for that. Or serrapeptase for scarring.
Sorry, nattokinase is also being suggested for dealing with spike proteins.
That's right. And then you got things like serrapeptase for scarring and things like that. So there are specific enzymes that are designed systemically, which have nothing to do with digestion. And then there's cultured enzymes. A cultured enzyme is an enzyme that is grown on specific mediums in certain conditions that enhance and amplify the efficacy of them, oftentimes 100 to 1,000 times more effective than the same amount of enzyme. And they have all these different regulatory aspects like HUTs, for example, on proteases. And it's a little obscure how they evaluate enzymes, the science of it. And then you would use for best results, cultured enzymes. We have found in our lab studies that you can use cultured enzymes not only for digestion. They usually have a pH effectiveness from 2 to 12. They're hundreds, if not thousands of times more powerful than regular enzymes and can be used as a systemic enzyme for effectiveness as well. Like proteolytic activity particularly is one that you want to look for because that's what gets us mostly in trouble inside of the bloodstream, undigested protein floating around in the blood. And if you look at a microscopy or you look at inflammatory response and things like that, or, some of the more novel things that are going along due to the remedies that have been promoted by corrupt authorities in the last few years. So we went straight to cultured enzymes. We recognized that as a company, we were going to go to the cultured enzyme side. And I think one of the reasons we've been around for so long is because we do create the most effective cultured enzymes. And I can actually make that statement with 100% accuracy because we have a microbiome lab, a bioengineering department at the university, Birch University in Bosnia. We've got dozens and dozens of PhDs and master students who run tests on every single enzyme company out there, and hands down, we're crushing all of them by factors of at least 6x. And
how do you measure that?
Well, there's the state of the art methodology is a thing called InfoGest. They essentially build a new stomach, a stomach. they replicate the conditions of the stomach, and then they take out and evaluate the role of the digestibility of things through that process. And so that's kind of the gold standard. And it's really neat. It's shocking. And on top of that, when you start to combine enzymes with probiotics, it's very interesting, or minerals with probiotics. So the enzymes, I would say, are the first part of the stage. The second or the third part of the stage, hydrochloric acid, if you've got your hydrochloric acid in order, you don't have to worry about it. But as we age, we tend to produce less. So sometimes the hydrochloric acid and betaine hydrochloric acid, you get it from beets or whatever. It's pretty simple. We make a really good one that we put minerals with it. And it's super effective for a lot of people. That's all a lot of people need is like one capsule of HCl if they're having digestive problems. It's fine. That's enough for them. And of course, there's a relation between H. pylori because H. pylori will proliferate if you don't have enough hydrochloric acid. So usually after a course of like 90 days or so, people oftentimes don't have to use hydrochloric acid anymore once they beat down the H. pylori. But when you're looking at these models of how what bacteria produce under these situations, the good bacteria and bad bacteria, it's fascinating how when you add enzymes, their digestibility of the bacteria and what they produce changes. If you add certain key minerals to them, they'll produce a different set of antioxidants or different metabolic markers that are unique. And you start to realize, wow, these are very sophisticated organisms that do a broad array of things. And it's a lot of fun to kind of I don't like doing the pipettes and stuff that they all do over there and you do this stuff, but I love looking at the research and seeing it. And then now we have a microscope where you can actually look at these things entering, whether products enter into the cell. So for example, you could take magnesium, for example. We sell a really good magnesium. We can actually observe the different types of magnesium, how much will be absorbed if you add enzymes to it, if you add, this vitamin or that vitamin as a precursor, if you use these elements, how much actually gets delivered into the cell. And you can start to see this now. So it's really cool. It's like, that's actually working. I can see it right with my own eyes. Does this work? Does this not work? So we're continually doing experiments on that. And we're one of the only companies that actually does it. Most people take scientific research, double-blind study, which is interesting, double-blind study, right? And then advocate out of that with no ability to check the raws, no ability to see the synergistic effects of their formulations, and no ability to see if it's actually delivering on whatever the marketing promises are. We're the inverse of that. We can see all of that stuff and validate what we put out there. And I think that's what makes our product superior.
Mm. Julie, a 47-year-old who works in computer sales, came to see me complaining of lifelong irritable bowel syndrome, which included severe abdominal pain and bloating, loose and very frequent stools, along with hot flushes, menstrual brain fog, and low energy, which affected her work performance. After taking a comprehensive history, plus running some labs, I discovered that Julie had a parasite infection, which may have been causing the loose stools, a methane-producing bacterial overgrowth that was almost certainly causing the abdominal bloating and pain, a leaky gut, low levels of digestive enzymes, as well as eating too many high oxalate foods on her vegetarian diet. So Julie reduced the high oxalate foods from her diet, plus she took a broad-spectrum antimicrobial supplement to help with the parasites and the bacteria in her gut, probiotics to increase her good bacteria and help repair her gut lining. She also took prebiotics to help feed the commensal bacteria, digestive enzymes to improve her digestion, and herbs to help clear the toxic lipopolysaccharides from her system produced by the overgrowth of gram-negative bacteria. At the end of the program, Julie reported that her health had never been better. In her own words, the improvement is staggering. The abdominal pain and bloating was gone. Her stools were back to normal. Her energy was up. She no longer had brain fog or hot flashes, and her immune system had improved as she no longer suffered from frequent bugs and colds. If you're suffering like Julie was and you want to get to the root cause of your problem, you can arrange a consultation with me at bodycheck.co.uk. That's BODYCHEK. And if we're a good fit, I could help you achieve the same kind of results as Julie. Now, back to the podcast. So you spoke a lot about enzymes, but again, if someone's looking to choose, say, a hydrochloric acid supplement, what would be your advice in terms of what they should be looking for?
Well, hydrochloric acid, a good betaine HCl product, it's pretty simple. I like to buffer it with a little bit of enzymes and minerals. It tends to be more effective. That's what we do. So that it like every product that we make is standalone. And then it also will work synergistically with the other products. That's how we build things. So that's one of the simplest things. Do the test. Like, as I said, the baking soda test.
Yeah.
And you'll be off to the races. If you need a little hydrochloric acid, then take a cap after every meal and you're good to go.
And what about probiotics? What would be your...
Probiotics is a remarkable field. And there's so much that we don't know and so much that we're learning. So there are different families of probiotics that work synergistically together. And they grow on different types of foods. And there's 6 standardized tests that determine, does it have an impact on gram-negative or gram-positive bacteria? What's its survivability with toxins or antibiotics? What families of probiotics that they actually work with? What mediums that they tend to grow on or stay dormant on? All these really interesting components. So we categorize our formulations for unique aspects. For example, we have Pitherome, which is a mutated version of L. plantarum. Basically, they put it through a toxic soup, ran a sine wave through it, about 2% survive, and then you grow them on specific mediums, and they cultivate unique properties. You can't say the unique properties. You just have to look at the U.S. patent on it, because if we did, they'd shut our channel down. That's that effective. That's like a Navy SEAL probiotic. Then you have something like the cognibiotics bacteria, which we have an array of bacteria which work unified to produce serotonin. 95% of your serotonin is made in your gut. And so those are families that we've got another product, which is Microbiome Breakthrough, which is combining a bunch of bacterias with amino acids and stuff that helps repair the gut lining. So these are, different families. And unfortunately, I don't think that, although stool tests will give you a sample, a short-term sample, it's not the absolute. I do believe that your own feedback mechanisms of observation are still superior to stool sampling. Maybe it'll get better, but your microbiome is changing literally meal to meal. If you go through a stressful situation, if you're subjected to toxins, it's very responsive. They're highly communicative organisms. But if your poo's not right, or you're feeling bloated, if you're not, vacating your colon regularly and you have all that stuff, you got some digestive issues, and there's likely a misbalance. And of course, in the extreme cases, you start getting, like yeast infections or breakouts or continuous brain fog, constant bad breath. Those are good indicators that you have severe dysbiosis and you want to start to aggressively go. And so typically we'll use like P3OM as a universal go in and just beat down the bad guys. During that time, it oftentimes becomes easier to adjust the diet relative to what's best for your individual genetics and lifestyle. And you can do a genetics test, and that will say maybe you're more, you're better with fats, or you're better with carbohydrates. And so you would structure your diet that way. And then, or your detox pathways are good or bad or whatever it happens to be, which would allow you to be, depending on more restrictive or less restrictive on how you detox, all the modern foods that are out there nowadays. And then if you are suffering from leaky gut or things like that, then you would do maybe a small course of, repairing your gut, or systematically using that when you feel that, oh, you know what, I went out to the bar on Friday night and ate some tacos and beers, and now I woke up in the morning and I'm like, oh, I don't feel so good. Well, you've probably got undigested protein in your system. You want to seal that gut off, clean out your diet, hydrate up, do some saunas, get the body moving, and start flushing the system. So I see it as an accelerant tool and as a tool of specificity. And we're continuing to develop new tech around. Ideally, we're in a crisis situation and we're hoping to solve that. Our head of research, Dr. Monia Advich, she says that we're 10 to 20 years from the post-antibiotic era. What that means is that most of the antibiotics that are being used today for surgeries and all this sort of stuff, they've saved millions of lives, but the overprescription has caused a variety of bacteria-resistant strains. Some of the most dangerous places to go for bacteria-resistant strains of our hospitals. We're using tens of thousands of times more potent antibiotics than we did 60, 70 years ago, and with less and less effectiveness. She says that in 10 to 20 years, all these antibiotics aren't going to work. So we need to develop and engineer new super strains of probiotics to meet the demands of the world today. And that's what we're undergoing at our lab right now to work on this, because that's where we're headed. And we want to address those things as quickly as opposed to wait until the problems arise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. You mentioned, when someone's gut isn't very good, or they've got a leaky gut, they can have breakouts. And you mentioned overuse of antibiotics. You probably don't know my story. So for 18 years, I had quite severe acne. And it wasn't until I met Paul Chek that I actually started the path to actually heal myself, rather than, putting rubbish on my skin that was toxic and just wasn't helping anyway. But I actually took antibiotics for 18 years.
Wow.
And what's quite interesting, it's been 20 years now since I stopped. As soon as I stopped taking antibiotics, my skin got better, ironically. I went on an antifungal protocol and cut out foods that I was sensitive to. I've ran dozens of stool tests on myself, and it's quite interesting that even though I'm probably one of the healthiest people on the planet, when I look at my lab results of my stool tests, they still don't look great, But just coming back to what I was going to say, I actually help a lot of people with acne now. So, for the last 15, 20 years, I've been helping other people that have got acne. And right at the core of it is the gut health.
Yeah. What were the things that you tend to do for acne treatment?
So there's a number of things. So the first thing is to change the diet for most people. So there are some things that can definitely trigger trigger acne from your diet. In particular, things that spike insulin. Mm-hmm. So if insulin gets spiked, and then obviously you get IGF-1 increases as well, and that stimulates what's called the mTOR pathway, which leads to more growth of skin cells, which can block the pores, etc. So diet is one. Cleaning up the microbiome is probably the next thing that I look to do. Then, whilst I'm working on that, I try to get them to what I call the outside-in detox. So it's getting all the toxic things out of their environment, or at least trying to minimize them, or swapping them for things that aren't quite so toxic. And then the next stage is trying to get the toxins that are in their body out of the body, with a number of different cleanses and obviously things like saunas. The final thing, and the least important in my view, is actually what you do with your skin. But there are some good things you can put on your skin, things that can decrease the pH of the skin, which is a good thing for the bacteria on the skin. Obviously can cool the skin down because often it's inflamed. It's interesting you asked that, because I've actually got a book on that very subject coming out in October.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
I'd like to get you on the podcast and interview on that particular thing, because there's so many people struggling with that.
Yeah, it's about 10% of the world's population.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
So one of the things that you mentioned was detoxing as well. What do you do to help your detoxification system?
So I fast at least 1 day a week.
Mm-hmm.
I do a water fast every week. And oftentimes I'll add enzymes while I'm doing that. Mm-hmm. I have a Hocat machine. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those. So I have a Hocat machine in my house, which it runs 10 different biohacks in one. It basically, you're encapsulated. Put some CO2 into you for 3 minutes, kind of balance out your gas exchange, and then you do like 30 minutes of inside the steam capsule with ozone. Mm-hmm. So you're about 50 degrees Celsius that you're running in there in 100% humidity, and you can vary the rate of ozone percentage inside of that. I think you also have light therapy in there. You have a PEMF machine in there. You're on oxygen at the same time. So it's great. Literally it's 10 biohacks in one setting. So I'll do that a few times a week, or if I'm not available to that, I like to jump in the sauna. I probably use about, on average, 6 liters of water per day that I would consume. I exercise a lot, and I'm in a dry climate, so I'm very conscious about hydrating regularly throughout the day, because I think water, I always say the solution to pollution is dilution. You pee in the ocean, nobody notices. Pee in a pool, everybody notices. Pee in a hot tub, well, it's grounds for a divorce, right? So those are the primary things. And then skin brushing. I'll use skin brushing regularly. I don't use chemical agents on my skin or anything like that. That's a big factor. And then I'll also amplify my mitochondrial production. I do NAD treatments. I usually go get IV NAD 3 times a year. Getting ready to go for another course right now. It's good for, I find, about 4 months is a good run where I really have an energetic, and that just seems to accelerate a lot of things. I do cell trainer. So if you've atmospheric cell trainer, where you're you're in a capsule and you go really high altitude and down in altitude, up in altitude, down in altitude, really relatively quickly. That's really powerful. And I also rebound regularly. So I have a mini trampoline up on my rooftop gym, and I get up there and I bounce on that pretty much every day, because that pumps the lymphatic system. And, my sister died of essentially a toxic lymphatic system, which is 3.5 times the volume of a blood system. And so jumping on a rebounder for 10 minutes a day, and I'll jump on it for an hour. You've got to build yourself up if you haven't done that before. Just because I feel great, it feels good, and there's a flushing effect on my whole body as those cells contract, and just pushes that stuff out of the cells. And the good news is we have evidence, a lot of evidence that what I've just advocated. So regular rebounding, hydration, and detoxification through some either sauna or ozone therapy, and then boosting your mitochondrial function. I do cryo and cold therapy and stuff like that too. So hot and cold. When we did there's a cellular volume called your phase angle of your cell that they're testing for to see how buoyant the cell is, how rigid that cell is, determining your effectiveness. And I can say that something's working because over at the Biohacking or Upgraded Labs, I'm the number one score they've ever had over that place. And I'm not saying that to brag, but I think it's because I'm doing all those things, and I think anybody else could do the same thing. We do know that if a person fasts regularly, if I'm fasting versus I'm eating a lot, and I've done a test where we've had, UFC fights and I'm eating all sorts of foods. I have one day a week where I can have whatever I want. So I don't develop what I would call negative subconscious or emotional associations with food. I'm really conscientious that you can become a really just like you can become like a toxic freak. But I'll watch my phase angle after eating that food, and my phase angle will drop, from high 7s to like 4s. And, it's like a massive drop, 4s or 5s. If I dehydrate, that'll drop my cell things. And of course, if I do those other things that I advocated, I see that it goes up. So I've literally done the experiments to say, okay, what happens if I dehydrate myself? What happens if I bounce on a rebounder? What happens if I fast? What happens if I eat good food versus junk food? What happens when I do these things? And so when I sharing these things with you, or your listeners, I've tested it. It works. They can test it themselves. And those are the areas that they can look at if they want to make sure that they're detoxing properly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So one of my own beliefs is that, well, after our thoughts, beliefs, and values, the next most important thing to our health is the gut. But it's not just, the old saying, you are what you eat. I think more importantly, you are what you digest.
Yes.
What effect would you say does the efficiency of digestion have on things such as muscle growth and metabolism?
It's massive, and I can speak to that directly. So one of the fascinating things that, one of the exchanges that Paul and I had, which he felt was remarkable, is he was like, he when we first got connected, he was like, he wanted to know how I was able to compete successfully in bodybuilding contests on a plant-based diet. He says, I haven't been able to observe that. And I said, I know, I understand why. Largely in part, people will say, okay, if I'm competing as a strength athlete or a bodybuilding athlete, and bodybuilders are on the extreme side of muscle building, so their protein requirements are very high. Runners, of course, actually would have very high protein requirements because of the damage that they do. But the standard is 1 gram per pound of body weight, let's say. Well, try getting 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein on a plant-based diet without going to massive amounts of calorie overload. And so what I realized is that, well, what is that based on? That's a general sense of assumptions based on young athletes. Most bodybuilders skew towards the young side where they have high hormone levels, or they're taking exogenous hormones, which increase protein synthesis. Why do they take steroids? They take steroids because it increases protein synthesis and improves recovery, right? There's some other effects as well, but for the most part, that's the big, it switches on protein production at the muscle tissue and allows you to grow more muscles. Okay, great. Well, I said, well, how do we know you don't need protein? You need the amino acids from protein. So the fundamental assumption is if I eat 200, like I'm just under 200 pounds. So the standard rule will be I need somewhere between 175 and 200 grams of protein a day, or 150 to 200 grams. Some people say 0.8, some, whatever. Okay. So let's just cap it at 200 grams of protein a day. Well, am I getting 200 grams of amino acids into my body? No. So the description I gave you, digestive proteolytic enzymes present, the level of hydrochloric acid, the type of bacteria in my gut are going to determine how well I absorb and utilize convert the protein into amino acids. So we always say you're not what you eat, you're what you digest, absorb, and utilize. Okay. And there's a lot of athletes, and I've done these experiments because I'll do a fasting day and a feasting day each week. And I'll give you an example how data gets skewed. So if I fast and let's say I go do a sauna, I'll see my lean body mass drop from, say, 155 pounds to maybe as much as 145 pounds in a day. In a day. Conversely, if I go on a big feasting fest for a day, I'll go from 155 pounds, and the more I've reduced my carbohydrate intake before, I'll get an increase, a super compensation effect by water and carbohydrates going into the muscle. I can add 6 or 7 pounds of quote unquote lean body mass on a typical test. So we're talking literally a 10% variance in lean body mass and a correlation of the same amount of muscle mass. You change 10 pounds one way or the other, your body fat percentage on a scale would change 4 or 5% in a day. Well, you're not losing 4 or 5% body fat in a day. So I always track how much fat mass do I actually have, and then how much lean body mass, and then what's the variance on my lean body mass, which stays pretty static. I just did 18 months of continuous dieting last year for the Olympia. And at the end of the day, my lean body mass was exactly the same when I started as when I ended. As a 50-year-old guy, not on any kind of hormone replacement. So so all things aside, and I'm eating about 100 grams of protein a day, but my conversion of that 100 grams into amino acids, I'm probably getting more amino acids than someone who's eating, lots of meat products that are eating 200 grams. So my conversion's great. It's optimized. I'm able to maintain my lean body mass. I'm not using exogenous hormones, which are going to tip the balance of that equation. Now, could I produce better results if I was eating meat? Maybe. Could I produce better results if I was taking exogenous hormones? 100%. There's no question about it. So a lot of people just aren't comfortable identifying all the factors that are going into the equation. So many of the bodybuilding experts out there are taking exogenous hormones and not factoring that into the equation. As you age, your ability to digest, absorb, and utilize these things for the reasons we mentioned before is going to diminish, so you're getting less results from that. The quality of the foods that you're eating relative to your pathways, how well you're detoxifying your cells, because you start to get protein buildup in the blood and inside the cells, which they believe is what causes the aging and degeneration process. So typically bodybuilders don't live that long, right? So there's an optimal amount, which is still a very nebulous component. We don't really know what the optimal amount. What we can say, though, is this: from a longevity perspective, from a vitality and performance level, the better you convert amino acids to recover and build muscle mass, that seems to be successful from a performance side. And if you're training for aesthetics, you can carry that over to aesthetics. From a health side, there's a diminishing return on increased protein over time, and that too much protein becomes problematic and tends to shorten life. And so from a health perspective, as well as providing a variety of other compounding problems. So our whole company's ethos is trying to find the balance of the right amount of food based on your lifestyle objectives over the course of those three areas. And they're going to vary from different times. We do know this: longevity tends to be associated with eating less. And I believe, but the other side of the equation is that a lot of people on the planet have died at an early age because of starvation from nutritional deficiency. So the eating less equation isn't actually right. You need enough food that you can survive and provide all the elements, but overeating is the problem that we're dealing with now, overeating the wrong things and the inability to take those toxins out of the system. So I believe that the digestive system is the key aspect. It's not about how much you eat or how little you eat. It's how well you do that conversion over the course of your life that's going to determine the level of vitality as well as the potential length of your lifespan. So that's how I've calculated it. But it's an inexact science. So we're postulating, and what's great is Matt and I have been using prodigious amounts of enzymes and probiotics and some hydrochloric acid over the last 20 years with completely different diets. And so we're continually calibrating, and we'll see who wins the longevity equation. So I don't know how it's going to go.
So for you, do you think that you're able to extract amino acids out of your diet purely because you've got enough hydrochloric acid, you've got enough enzymes, you've got the right microbiome? Is it as simple as that?
Yes, it is as simple as that. And, I'll give you I just got some data back the other day. Our Masszymes product, which is our kind of catch-all enzymatic formulation, 17 different enzymes in it, very high in proteolytic enzymes. Under lab conditions, the very, very, very best product on the market that's available on shelves is 600% less effective. And there's other ones that are other top brands are 2,400% less effective. And those are effective to a certain rate over natural digestion. So when I competed in the universe in the second time, after I got my digestive health screwed up in 2003, I was eating about 250 grams of whey protein a day because there was no plant-based proteins in 2003. There was nothing you could use. And so I was using whey protein as a lacto-vegetarian. You're not really a full vegetarian on that, but that created havoc in my digestive system. That was a disaster for me. So when I came back 4 years later, I competed. I think that I was a superior athlete in 2007 or for what I was for 2003. I certainly felt a lot better and had a lot more energy, a lot more vitality. I literally had a little bit more muscle than I had in 2003. And I didn't have the digestive problems. I didn't gain the weight afterwards. And I was only eating 85 grams of plant-based protein a day at that time. And, at that time I was I was 35. I was 35, where in the previous contact test, I was 31. So in my own personal life, that's the evidence I have. And then I was able to come back at 50 and achieve, other than the skin, I noticed some of the elasticity is gone in my skin. I was able to compete successfully at pretty much the same conditioning that I had before, maybe a little better in my legs than I was earlier. And whether that's aging or training mechanisms, probably a little bit of both, but those things are possible.
So we've got enzymes, we've got hydrochloric acid, we've got probiotics / the microbiome, but obviously hormones must come into that equation as well, right?
Well, and that's the part of the equation where I'm at that threshold right now, based on all of the training and exercise that I've been able to do in the last, say, few years under what I would call fairly rigid conditions. Like for 18 months, I stayed in a hyper rigid dietary monitoring stuff. Like I ate the same things every day for 18 months in a calorie deficit for that time. And a high volume of training, and didn't lose any muscle mass, didn't gain any muscle mass. For the 6 months after that, I went into running, and my muscle mass dropped, particularly in my legs, as I switched to more of an endurance type training. And but my body fat went up because I found it much harder to regulate my carbohydrate consumption, particularly. I would get, you go for a long run. I'd have this kind of period where I wasn't that hungry. And then either that evening or the next day, depending when I do it, I noticed there were massive spikes in appetite and I would eat a lot more food. So my body fat went up. I stopped the contest and I wasn't regulating my calories at all, just to see what it would take for my muscle mass to go up. And the evidence suggests that I wasn't able to. So, I competed at a body fat percentage on a DEXA scan at just over 8% on a DEXA scan when I was at the Universe. I ran the marathon at around 13%, and I didn't put on a pound of muscle until I reached 18% on my body fat. That's when my body says, okay, you can put on a little bit of muscle now. So that indicates to me that my hormones are probably suboptimal. I've just got some recent data the other day on my Dutch test, which says, although I'm still in the normal ranges of testosterone, I'm on the lower side, and I'm higher on the estrogen side right now. And I predispose for more estrogenic. That's why I don't have the best genetics for bodybuilding. So I'm attempting for the rest of this year to address that through a specific herbal and nutritional program to see if I can raise my testosterone levels to what I would say is a good, where I'd like to be. I'm also in Venice Beach, California, and I'm subjected to a lot of toxins and a high EMF range, which I think is suboptimal for cortisol production. And there's indications of that. So I'll try that. I'll probably move to a rural environment at the end of the year. And after that, we'll take a look at the hormones and see what I'm able to do. But I'm definitely suboptimal for an athlete. And it's why you don't see a lot of 50-year-old guys in Olympic athletes or sprinting or doing those things. You can look good or you can be good, but you just don't have that explosive power or that ability to recover like you did, 15 years ago. And I spend twice the amount of time on recovery now from training than I did 15, 20 years ago. And I do believe that's directly correlated with hormone profiles.
Yeah. When 35-year-old Amanda first scheduled to see me, she'd been suffering for 19 years from severe IBS, diarrhea, and fecal incontinence, along with abdominal pain and bloating. Her condition had not only made life uncomfortable for Amanda, but very inconvenient as she had to walk 2 hours to work every day along a route that had public toilets, and she'd never been on holiday as an adult because of her condition. The only advice that several doctors and specialists had given Amanda was to take Imodium, and when she first saw me, she was taking 5 Imodium a day and wasn't getting any better. To help Amanda, I ran tests to find out what foods were right for her metabolic type, to see which foods she was sensitive to, and to assess her gut microbiome. Tests showed that Amanda had several food sensitivities and a parasite infection. Over the coming weeks, I coached Amanda to eat right for her type and to replace the foods she was sensitive to, and a protocol to deal with her parasite infection. And after 3 months, Amanda was IBS-free, and she also reported her skin was much improved and she had lost weight. And she booked a holiday for her and her husband to New York, as they'd never been on a proper honeymoon because of her IBS. And if you're suffering like Amanda was, and you want to get to the root cause of your problem, you can arrange a consultation with me at www.bodycheck.co.uk. And if we're a good fit, I could help you achieve the same kind of results as Amanda. Now, back to the podcast. Yeah, it's interesting. I just had a week off and I played tennis every day for 7 days for 2 hours. Pretty intense. And I was actually amazed that, at my age, I could actually do that. Because I can remember doing a tennis camp probably 20 years ago. And I remember by day 5, I was in bits. And so I'm obviously doing something right because,
Yep.
2 hours of plyometric training, which is what tennis is, because it wasn't, I don't play tippy tappy tennis. I play proper tennis. Right.
No.
And, I was just quite amazed. And I just thought, wow, I actually said, because one of my friends is a coach and he coached me for the first 4 days. And I said, well, I don't even know if I'm going to last 4 days. because, in years gone by, I know how intense that can be. And, your joints start to hurt and your muscles start to really ache. But I mean, I had slight muscle soreness, slight, I've got it worse today. I haven't been to the gym on Wednesday. So 2 days later, I've got more muscle soreness now than having played tennis every day for a week, which is kind of cool.
What do you attribute the recovery capabilities to from it?
I don't know. I do feel the last few years I've been getting better at recovery, which is quite strange. After I passed the age of 50, I'm actually finding I'm recovering better. So it definitely got worse from the age 37 to 50. But now it seems like the last 4 years, I'm actually getting better at recovering.
That's interesting.
I'm not quite sure exactly why. I mean, I do use a lot of collagen. I don't know if that's potentially helping. But yeah, who knows? I do feel like I'm doing something right anyway.
That's I love hearing that. That's inspiring.
So one of the things that I hear quite a lot, and I'm sure you've heard this a lot as well, is people say, well, surely I can get everything I need from my diet. Why do I need to supplement? What would your response be to that question?
Well, first off, it's a low resolution application by ignorant people to the realities of life. First off, what are they basing everything they need on? That's probably an incomplete assessment. Second thing, are they factoring in their optimal and suboptimal methylation pathways, their digestive health, the dietary stuff, the elemental components, antioxidants, all that sort of stuff, minerals, vitamins, all these things, phytonutrients that you would require, many of which we know, and there's probably a bunch of things that we don't know. It's like, and then the third, what are they basing that on as far as an evaluation process of their food? Because most of the food that people are eating today has gone through decades and decades of degradation through commercialized farming. One only has to go to a Mennonite farm and eat a tomato versus an organic, biodynamic tomato that you get from the store. And you'll see those tomatoes taste totally different. The other thing is we're subjected to large amounts of barium, strontium, and aluminum inside of the environment. There's all sorts of toxicities blowing over the whole planet. So is there really organic food or any of that sort of stuff? No, not likely. So, and then what is your detoxification pathways? Because that's a big aspect of nutrition. Well, it's what you eat, digest, absorb, and utilize. But also, as you build up a level of toxicity, this is disruptive in your ability to put stuff in. It's like you got to take the old couch out of the house, the old sofa out before you bring the new one in. They don't fit in the same cells. So they don't fit in your house, and good stuff won't fit in your cells if you got bad stuff in there. And by living in the world that we're living in, there's bad stuff in there. So, and I have yet to see someone who says they can get everything from their diet show what I call inspiring levels of health, vitality, and performance. Yet to see it. If I go down and hang out with Paul, first off, Paul's as disciplined as anybody in the selection of the highest quality food that he gets. His understanding of the metabolic pathways is exceptional. He's a tremendous physical specimen and a polymath in a variety of different areas. And he supplements. So that tells you something. If you go see a guy like, Laird Hamilton, one of the greatest athletes on the planet and a super vital guy, he supplements. I've never met anybody in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that looks great, is inspiring, and is exuding a level of health and vitality that isn't supplementing or offsetting the suboptimal aspects of their own genetics or diet or hormones or whatever. And so, yeah, I feel bad for those people because they're setting themselves up for radical failure. And it's kind of like, it's a hubris of, well, we just, you can get everything you want from a diet. Well, that's a real blanket statement. You know,
Yeah.
it's dogmatism at its height.
Yeah, it's kind of old fashioned, isn't it, really? I mean, if you said that 2,000 years ago, only obviously there weren't supplements, but if you'd have said that about the diet 2,000 years ago, you would have been right, because you don't have all the toxins, you don't have all the demolition of the soil, etc. You know, if you're wiping out all the microorganisms in the soil, you don't have the nutrients in the plants.
Yeah. And, you know, the other thing is life expectancy back then wasn't that great.
Mm.
So there's a variety of, you know, situations that came up. And then if you look at the development of, let's say, you know, the nutritional industry, which largely started to happen in the West, you know, with scurvy and vitamin C, is like, oh, we could take extra vitamin C to offset the conditions. So that's another piece that I think is often overlooked, is the conditions that the human organism finds himself in are also going to shift the needs. So the further that you go north from the equator, your vitamin D levels drop precipitously. And vitamin D is involved in just about everything. It's actually a hormone. And one of the reasons why I have light skin and someone who's from the equator has dark skin is because the melanin adjustment so that you can absorb light. So my girlfriend's Brazilian, and you know, she's got excellent muscle building genetics and these type of things. She's very athletic. She's a world champion in jiu-jitsu. And I said, yeah, but you know what I can do? I can beat you in vitamin D. I can get enough vitamin D in 15 minutes. It takes you 6 hours to get that vitamin D. So I'm faster than you. That's the only thing I'm probably faster than her in. But, you know, that's a great example. And you see a lot of people with high melanin pigments in their body. If you look at the evidence, cardiovascular disease and bone degeneration, insulin factors are more prolific in those categories the further north that they move. And again, it's directly correlated to vitamin D, which is not even, people are supplementing with vitamin D, but there's nothing better than the sun. But you need to get the precise amounts. Too much sun is damaging. Too little is problematic. And that's going to go across the spectrum depending on how much melanin you have in your skin. That's it. So, and you know, of course, now they make all these stories about race and all that sort of stuff. Race really refers to the amount of melanin that you produce in your body. I mean, it's ridiculous. So it's like, I don't even know why that's like how we apply such low resolution dynamics to divide people, as opposed to just looking at the objectivity of it. Well, if I have darker skin, I need more sun. And if I have lighter skin, I need less sun, but we all still need sun. And just like we all need each other on the planet, and we all add value. So we have to look at it a little bit more holistically, I think.
Definitely. I've had previous guests on the show discussing the gut-brain connection. What are your views on the gut-brain connection, and what difference can have a healthy gut have on the brain?
Well, we know for a fact that bacteria work synergistically with our nervous system to send off chemicals. That's why people who are on a high sugar diet, they go off the sugar in the first little days, the bacteria start sending signals to be extra hungry, blood sugar fluctuations, all these sort of things. As they go through a detoxification program over a period of maybe days, weeks, months, they start to notice that their sugar cravings start to go down. Why? Because the bacteria cultures start to die off. We also know that they're involved in immunosystem regulation. According to Monia, the head of our lab, bacteria are very social creatures. They're always communicating with their environment. And they also work synergistically with our mitochondria. And our body has a myriad of regulatory mechanisms that keeps those tight lines of energy production, oxygen, CO2, gas exchanges inside the body, pH levels, and bacteria, because they're working symbiotic and converting what we eat into that, or serving as a regulatory agent against pathogenic components. They send signals, and our nervous system picks up these signals and translates it into response mechanisms from our brain. And then there's the whole stuff around the valgus nerve about fight or flight. So as a person is in a highly stressed environment, it impairs gut health. So your mind can impair your gut, and your gut can impair your mind. And that's why, especially in today's world, the practice of moving yourself out of the fight or flight response into the rest and relax response is really, really critical, because we're subjected to all of this input, and there's not enough space in that. And that starts to be perceived as stress, which disrupts microbiome production. So yeah, it shocks me that people don't see the connection. And we have a thing, trust your gut. What's your gut instinct say? So there is literally an intelligence that we have access to related to that. Or if you feel really anxious about something, you feel it in your gut, for example, right? Or if, depending on what predispositions you have, if you're really trying to work out a challenging problem, some people will eat excessively under those situations, and some people won't eat at all, depending on their how their neurochemistry works. And your bacteria produce a lot of the neurochemicals in your brain, which affect your emotions and mood. For example, serotonin is a great example. 95% of that is produced in your gut. So whether it's a direct or indirect component of providing you the neurochemicals that you need, or sending electrical impulses that make you aware of, regulatory mechanisms, both on a conscious and subconscious level, you can't if we don't have those bacteria in our body, we're dead. It's a symbiotic relationship. They need us and we need them. And without it, nothing works. And our nervous system, our brain, our mind, whatever you want to call it, is the regulatory mechanism between those two organisms.
Yeah, and there is quite a lot of research on, changes in microbiome and neurodegenerative disorders. So, Alzheimer's,
it's huge.
Dementia, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, you can go on and on. But also, we also know there's a link between gut health and autism as well, which is how Andrew Wakefield became involved in the autism, because obviously he was a gastroenterologist, and he was originally approached by parents with people that had gastro issues, but then he was getting more and more parents saying, well, they haven't just got gut issues. All of a sudden, they've got autism at the same time. So we know there's definitely a link there as well.
Yeah, leaky gut, for example, if you read that book, Wheat Belly, is a great example of sharing how these undigested proteins then get into the brain and start creating an inflammatory response, which leads to that cognitive decline. I think it's a great illustration of how that works. And we're seeing increased cognitive decline across the board, across all industrialized populations. And I do believe it's because of that.
Yeah, for sure. So I've got one more question for you. What do you see as the future of biohacking, health, aesthetics, and performance?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. This is a new book that's coming out in September 26. And we call it the Ultimate Nutrition Bible. And we're addressing those particular issues and looking at how you can be successful on virtually any dietary aspect. So there's three questions you have to ask. Number one, what is the right diet for me? What is the right diet for me right now? What is the right diet for me over the long term? And that's going to be determined by your genetics, a hierarchy of values, and your desired goal.
Yeah.
Okay. And we kind of break those down so that you self-select which ones are most important to you. So if I'm a high performance athlete in my 20s, my selection around diet, biohacking, recovery modalities, training modalities is going to be very different than if I'm trying to overcome a disease state versus someone who's, looking for living as long as possible or as vital as possible in their 50s or 60s or 70s. So recognizing those seasons, and then also how does your genetics and epigenetical responses vary on that? And then what's their sociological and psychological situation. So for example, I have a lot of clients and close friends in the Hindu culture, and the Hindu culture has the highest amount of vegetarians that you can get. And the social structure is very family and oriented within, there's a tremendous amount of expectations and social pressure that is engaged within the culture. And some of that's really good. It's one of the most successful cultures from family and performance globally. Yet, if you look at some of the health outcomes, on one level, it's not very good. And so what I've noticed is the social constructs that are involved there make it very difficult for some of those people to make the best choices. And they're going to have to take some hits socially or psychologically, and they better adhere to that if they're going to live at their best life. And that might be a trade-off that they don't want to do. Okay. You might have or cultivate a challenge or a problem at some stage in your life that's unexpected, like a disease condition, an injury, an accident. Those are going to determine what happens. And then as far as biohacking, what I found, and we call our company BiOptimizers because I believe it's biological optimization. Hacking always means that you're breaking into the system and with unknown consequences. So for example, I look at myself and I'm like, okay, what do I want to achieve? What do I want to do? Here's my genetics. Here's my digestive health. Here's the diet that fits my value hierarchy. Okay. And here's what I want to do in performance. And then my biohacks are going to be on an addition to that relative to what I'm trying to achieve. So I've built I'm working on a spreadsheet, and I kind of look at, I got, mitochondrial function, muscle mass, body fat percentage, bone density. Those are longevity factors that are, just forget it. If you're not addressing those things out of the gate, you're just not going to live your best life. Then you get into, gut health, you get into organ health, you get into detoxification pathways. And based on what might be giving you challenge or what area you want to optimize, you would cultivate diet, supplementation, and quote unquote biohacking tech around that. And that's exactly what I did to come back and do a bodybuilding contest at 50, and then switch gears and go into endurance training and go run a marathon 6 months later in 4 hours. Well, those are two very strong variables. Now, is a bodybuilding contest or an endurance training contest good for my longevity? Probably not. Those are more performance parameters that I wanted to do to work this out. And now I'm moving out of that and I'm moving back towards a more health promoting lifestyle accordingly. And, changing my supplementation, changing my biohacks, we're going on, I'll go do some more NAD treatments, some B-cell treatments for some cosmetic appeal, et cetera, So I believe that, number one, more and more people are going to do it. Number two, I think more and more people will select the specific biohacking technology that's relative to their unique challenges and opportunities and outcomes that we'll have in your house. Like, so my house, I have a bunch of things. When I go to Paul's, for example, one of the things, we were down there the other day and we're like, he's like, I got to do the steam room and the cold pool every day because he likes to smoke his Nick bags. I do too. I like that as well. He says, but if I don't do that, I start to build up too much nicotine inside the system and it's problematic. So he's detoxing. He likes the social construct and the cognitive euphoric health. And he's, doing a lot of cognitive work, and that helps sustain him and creates that connection that he likes. But on the same side, he's biohacking himself to offset whatever liabilities he has on that by, doing, prodigious amounts of vape bags and tobacco and et cetera, et cetera. So it's about really self-selecting and choosing the right biohacks for you. And I think they're going to become more and more neurofeedback technology. There's a new dry helmet technology. I personally use neurofeedback. I go twice a year under a customized neurofeedback form that's developed by an amazing neurofeedback. I think that might be the biggest biohack there is. In my experience, what you get the most value and gain out of, it's extraordinary. I think with the dry helmets that you'll be able to have at home now without all the goop on your heads, I think that's going to be a game changer. And I do believe that new technologies around frequency and light will be the continued growth, because we have to create counter energies around the negative consequences of negative light and negative frequency. So we'll start to understand that it's, evolutionary. These are evolutionary stressors of a technologically advanced world. So we'll automatically start to build more and more remedies, and from those remedies, we'll then cultivate optimal amounts to induce positive health by understanding the negative side. We tend to screw things up before we figure out what's best.
Very interesting. Maybe I'll get you on when you're 60 and we can look back and see whether you were right or not.
Yeah. And then there's another really interesting field that is emerging. And of course, that is, genetic engineering. We've had hormone optimization, which is an interesting field. I haven't engaged in taking hormones myself, but from a vitality performance side, there's certainly a lot of people that are singing the praises of that right now. It was poo-pooed by the bodybuilders are the original biohackers, because they're offsetting two evolutionary aspects: building excessive amounts of muscle, which is not an evolutionary successful, and getting excessively low body fat levels, which is not an evolutionary response. So you're countering two evolutionary tendencies. Now we're dealing with, physiological decline, sexual performance, cognitive function, accelerated aging or aging through time. So biohacking is essentially doing what bodybuilders were doing to muscle mass and body fat gain by trying to address the things that, take us off the planet. And since the birth rates are going up, like the age of people having children nowadays, so technology has made it that it takes us longer to become proficient in the modern world. And that's changing the production of children. So we're going to experience massive population decline because your window of having children, the amount of kids that you're having, and the cost of those kids in a technological world of making it, financially not viable for a lot of people. Well, we now, because of that, we're going to have to find ways to extend the window of when people can have kids as they become competent in a technological world. And so that's why you see the proliferation of fertility clinics and people addressing aging and stuff, because people are getting married later, they're having kids later, they're getting all the, and then associated problems as you have children, as you age out. I'm in the middle of that conversation right now, but I want to have kids. I haven't had kids yet. And I'm going through all of the regulatory aspects or the biohacking technology so that I can produce kids with my partner coming here in the future. We don't know if we're going to be successful on that yet or not. We'll find out. So I've got another Czechie, Dr. Nathan.
Yeah, he was on the podcast 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so I'm working with him because he's world class at what he does. Bringing people into the world and taking people out. It's a very unique skill set, and so I'm working with him to optimize. We're working with him to optimize our fertility and vitality for children. So I'm excited about that project, and I think there's going to be tremendous amounts of evidence on that, or research. And then who knows with the genetic engineering, already we got bodybuilders, hacking themselves with CRISPR genes. We have military industrial complex, which are building super people. It's probably bled into world championship athletics and Olympics now, particularly in some parts of the world. It's definitely an aspect that is going to emerge in, anti-aging technology. So with AI programs in genetic engineering, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I suspect there'll be a tremendous amount of focus and energy on that to whatever ends that is over the next 10 years.
Yeah, for sure. So what's next for you, Wade?
Well, next for me is the book launch. We're excited about that. And
when does it come out?
Comes out September 26th.
Okay.
Yep. Big announcement on all that sort of stuff. I think it's going to be, I think it's going to provide a nice platform for unity in the nutrition industry between the various models that are out there, and addressing those things as a kind of a reference guide, moving forward. So I'm excited about that. So that's the next focus. Ultimately, I want to move into children's education as I have my own kids. I'm very dissatisfied with the current education program and the indoctrination that's going on. And so I'm working on a project specifically for the education of children so that they have a great capacity to self-regulate and the capacity to learn without stunting those things, which I think the current education system currently is doing. And as I have my own children, the motivation factor keeps amplifying. So I'm planning for that right now. That's going to be the next big project. And then, having a little holistic health hotel, where people can come by and hang out, and I'll have my little wizard bar where I'm creating my cocktails and sending people over to the various, neurofeedback trainings and, cellular upgrades and those type of things. I kind of envision myself in a more rural area in the next few years doing that sort of stuff and, living more, I guess, like Paul does. I like what Paul created his Rainbow House mansion up there, and everybody comes to see him up on the mountain, and I like that idea. I think he's figured that out.
Yeah, awesome. And where can people find you online?
Yeah, just BiOptimizers.com. They got our social media channels, all the usual suspects. We've got a great free course called the Awesome Health course at the site, which is basically 7 parameters that we do, just to get people started. And then we have all our products at bioptimizers.com. Everything comes with a money back guarantee. We're really clear about if anybody tries or anything that we do, we always want we have the #1 customer service program in the health industry and the lowest refund rate of anybody I know. However, people try our products, I always say it's risk-free. If for some reason it doesn't produce the result you want, wasn't happy, something we didn't do right or whatever, we just give you your money back. We want you to redeploy that to some other company or someone else or some other expert that can solve your problem. We can't solve every problem. We solve a very specific set. Maybe we can help people out in theirs. And if we can't, we just give people their money back and allow them to redeploy it to the next person. And that's allow us to stick around for 20 years and hit the Inc. 5,000 2 years in a row. So we're doing something right.
Awesome. That's great. Wade, thank you so much for your time. I know we covered quite a lot of stuff today, which was great. And it was it wasn't just quantity, it was a lot of quality as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, some of the best questions I've been asked, it seems like all the Czechies that interview me know their stuff and have very poignant questions. And, you do a great job. So I really appreciate today's time together. It's great to connect, and hopefully we'll get to do so again sooner as opposed to later.
Absolutely. So that's all from Wade and me for this week. But don't forget, you can join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.